Hi, my name's Claire. I was married for exactly 1 day, and then I found out everything I loved was a lie. The restaurant manager called me the morning after my wedding. His voice was calm, too calm. He said, "Ma'am, we reviewed the camera footage. You need to see this for yourself. Come alone and don't tell your husband or his family." I didn't know it then, but that call, it ended more than just a honeymoon. It ended the version of me that used to trust blindly. My wedding dress was still hanging in the hallway. My husband was still asleep upstairs. And I was about to walk into something that would destroy not just my marriage, but everything I thought I knew about love, family, and loyalty. Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever trusted the wrong person? What time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop it in the comments below. I promise you, this story will stay with you. The light coming in through the blinds felt gentler than usual, as if it knew not to disturb anything. I was barefoot in the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, untouched, sitting beside the folded napkin from the breakfast I couldn't finish. I kept turning the new wedding ring on my finger, feeling its weight like it still didn't quite belong to me. The house smelled like fresh laundry and toast. Normal things. Too normal. I was alone. James had just left for a quick meeting with his brother. He kissed my forehead before walking out, still smelling like cologne and celebration. I'd watched him through the window as he got into his truck, smiling like we'd really done it, like everything ahead of us was golden. I picked up my phone to scroll, mostly just to keep my hands busy. And that's when it rang. Unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, but something, call it curiosity or something else entirely, made me swipe right. "Hi, is this Mrs. Barrett?" I hesitated a second. It still felt strange to hear. "Yes, speaking." "This is Kevin. I'm the manager from the reception venue, the Willow Room." I stood up straighter, almost knocking over the mug. "Oh, yes, hi. Everything was wonderful. Thank you again. The staff was—" "I'm sorry to interrupt," he cut in, polite but firm. "We were reviewing the camera footage from your event. There's something we need to show you." I blinked, unsure how to respond. "Footage?" "There was an incident," he said. "It's not anything to panic about, but I really think you should see it in person." My mind went to 100 places. Maybe someone had left a bag behind. Maybe a vendor had slipped and was trying to sue. Maybe— "I'd like to ask if you can come in today," he continued. "Sometime soon." "Of course, I can be there this afternoon. Should I bring my husband?" There was a pause, a deliberate one. "If possible, I'd prefer you came alone. And please don't mention this to your husband or his family." I felt the words settle in my chest like ice water. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing a half laugh. "Is this some kind of mistake?" "I wish it were," he said gently. "But you'll understand when you see it. And again, please come alone." He gave me a time, then he hung up. The silence afterward was deafening. I sat down slowly, like my knees didn't trust the floor to hold me. The screen of my phone was still lit with the call duration, but I couldn't bring myself to lock it. I stared at the name, unknown number. What could be so important that he'd ask me not to tell James? I glanced at our wedding photo, still propped up on the counter from yesterday. The one where James had his arm wrapped tightly around my waist, both of us grinning like fools. His brother stood right behind us. His mother had cried when we cut the cake. I remember she kept squeezing my hand like I'd been chosen for something. My first instinct was to call James, to tell him everything. I'd always been direct, never liked playing games. But the way Kevin said it, there was something heavy behind it, something careful. He wasn't just following protocol, he was warning me. Still, it felt ridiculous. This was our honeymoon. We were supposed to be planning a weekend getaway, not sneaking off to look at security footage. But then again, why was my heart pounding like this? I sat there for a while, just breathing, just thinking. Then I stood up. I didn't call James, I didn't text, I didn't even leave a note. I changed into something simple, tied my hair back, slipped on my flats like I was just going out for errands. My hands were calm when I grabbed my keys, but I knew better. By the time I got to the door, I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I placed my phone screen down on the counter for a second. The wedding ring caught the light again, small, golden, innocent-looking. I told myself it was probably nothing, I whispered, but my hands were already shaking. I didn't pause. I didn't even look back. I locked the door with a quiet click and walked straight to my car, my keys already in my hand like I'd rehearsed it. The driveway was still bathed in soft light. It should have felt like any other morning, but it didn't. I sat for a moment before starting the engine, just long enough to glance at my phone. No texts from James, no missed calls, not even a "where'd you go?" That should have felt like freedom, but it didn't. It felt like walking out on stage and realizing no one was watching. The engine hummed to life, steady and familiar, and I backed out of the driveway without turning on the radio. I didn't want music, I didn't want noise, I just wanted answers I didn't have. I took the usual route, but the road felt unfamiliar, like everything had shifted by a fraction of an inch overnight. The same stop signs, the same parking lots, the same gas station where James once surprised me with flowers, just because. But now, even the sunlight seemed artificial, too bright, too clean for the tension crawling under my skin. A red light caught me off guard at the intersection near the church. I tapped the brake a little too hard, the seatbelt catching across my chest. A woman jogged across the crosswalk with a stroller. I watched the child kicking its feet, giggling at something the mother said. Their world was still intact. Mine had a crack I could feel but couldn't see. My hands stayed on the wheel, but my mind drifted. I started rehearsing what I'd say when I got there. Maybe it's just a billing thing, a charge discrepancy, or a lost purse someone turned in. But none of those explanations held for more than a second. They fell apart the minute I imagined the manager's voice. Low, serious, too careful. People don't ask you to come alone for billing errors. Maybe they found something on someone else, not me. Maybe it had nothing to do with me at all. I could just be the person they called because I booked the place. That was all, nothing more. Still, I kept checking the rearview mirror like I was expecting someone to follow me. My thoughts were spiraling, and I kept grabbing at anything that felt less terrifying than what my gut kept whispering. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't overreact. That voice was familiar, too familiar. It sounded like my mother's, or maybe every teacher, friend, and even James, telling me not to stir the pot, telling me to be the cool-headed one, the peacemaker. I'd spent most of my life being the person who gave the benefit of the doubt, who made excuses for others just to keep the room calm, who smoothed over what should have been questioned. Don't make a scene. Don't assume the worst. And so I didn't. I just kept driving. The closer I got to the restaurant, the more I noticed how normal everything looked. The sun glinting off the cars in the lot, the outdoor seating neatly arranged, a waiter adjusting the umbrellas on the patio like it was any other Thursday. I pulled into a spot near the back and turned off the ignition. For a moment, I just sat there, fingers resting on the key, staring straight ahead like maybe if I stayed still long enough, the world would shift back into something I recognized. But it didn't. The front door of the restaurant opened and the manager stepped out. Kevin, I remembered now. Late 40s, graying at the temples, clean white shirt tucked neatly into dark slacks. He spotted me and gave a small nod. No smile, no wave. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I got out of the car and walked toward him. He held the door open but didn't speak until we were inside. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice quieter than I remembered from our planning meetings. "Of course," I said, trying to sound casual. "Is something wrong?" His eyes met mine. There was a tightness in his jaw that hadn't been there before. "Let's talk in the back." We passed the bar, the empty booths, the kitchen doors swinging quietly. It was all too quiet for this time of day. No clattering dishes, no shouting chefs, just stillness. He led me down a hallway I hadn't seen before. The kind meant for staff, not guests. A narrow space with beige walls and a faint hum from some old vent overhead. "We weren't reviewing the cameras because of your wedding," he said over his shoulder. I followed, my steps slowing. "No?" "There was another incident earlier this week, unrelated, but while we were checking that footage, we noticed something else." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure I could. He stopped in front of a door with a keypad and turned toward me. "There's something you need to see, but more than that, something you need to hear." I blinked. "Hear?" He nodded once, solemn. "The system records audio. Most people don't realize that." It hit me like a cold draft under the skin. I had assumed, of course I had, that it was video only, that whatever this was, I'd be watching someone on a screen. But sound, that changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just about seeing something I hadn't noticed before. This was about words, about conversations, about truths caught without consent. And that was when I understood this wasn't about what I'd seen, but about what I was about to hear. The word audio was still settling in my chest when Kevin stepped aside, letting me enter the narrow security room. The door clicked shut behind us. I noticed the hum of the ceiling fan first, then the stale scent of too many reheated meals and equipment dust. The room was small, dimly lit by overhead bulbs that didn't quite chase away the shadows. A monitor glowed quietly in the center of the desk. Kevin didn't say anything. He just pressed play. The screen lit up, and before anyone spoke, I recognized the voice. It came from off-camera at first, just outside the frame, but I didn't need to see the mouth to know. My body responded before my brain had fully caught up. My stomach tightened. Breath caught halfway in my chest. James. I didn't say his name. I didn't even let myself think it. The camera showed a portion of the reception area. Soft lighting, floral centerpieces still fresh, my dress visible just at the edge of the screen where I'd been greeting guests. A few people stood around, chatting casually. I could see his mother, my new sister-in-law, and James, clear as day, talking in a small circle near the bar. Nothing about the image suggested conspiracy. They didn't look like people hiding something. They looked happy, at ease. But then the voice again, his voice. This time clearer, closer to the mic. "She really bought it," he said, low but relaxed. "Didn't even blink." Laughter. Not just his sister's too. "I told you she'd go along with it," she said, sipping something from a glass. "You act sweet for 6 months and boom, married, just like that." My mind clung to disbelief like a safety net that was already snapping. "She's not dumb," James said next. "Just hopeful, makes it easier. Honestly, I didn't expect her to say yes that quick." Another voice joined in, his mother's. I'd spent so much time trying to earn her approval, thinking I was one more Sunday dinner away from being accepted. "She's soft," she said flatly. "She won't question anything unless you give her a reason. Just don't be sloppy." None of them were whispering. None of them looked around like they were worried someone might overhear. It was like they forgot the world existed beyond their own circle. I wanted to stop the recording, walk out, reset the morning. But I couldn't move. I stood there frozen, hands hanging uselessly at my sides, as if my body decided I shouldn't feel all of this at once. "She doesn't have much family," his sister added, like she was listing an item on a grocery run. No one to warn her, no one to dig. My throat tightened. The audio wasn't grainy. It was clear enough to catch even the ice clinking in their glasses. I could hear the background music from the reception, the sound of someone laughing in another part of the room, someone completely unaware of the undercurrent just feet away. And then came the sentence that splintered everything. "She'll sign whatever we need," James said, "as long as it looks romantic." That one didn't land like a punch. It landed like a quiet slap. Not meant to hurt, just meant to remind me how little I'd meant in a moment that was supposed to be about love. I felt the blood drain from my face. My fingers were cold. I hadn't noticed I was gripping the back of the chair in front of me until I let go and saw the marks left by my nails in the fabric. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't ask Kevin to explain what I was watching or why he'd shown it to me. He stood silently nearby, awkward in the way people are when they know the truth is too big to soften. The video kept going. They went on laughing, making plans, tossing around timelines and paperwork like I wasn't even part of it, like I was just a placeholder, a tool. My breathing grew shallow. Every second of that audio confirmed what my instincts had been whispering since the phone call. I hadn't just married into a family. I'd been absorbed into a setup. Kevin shifted slightly but didn't speak. He looked down at his shoes like he wished he hadn't been the one to press play. I didn't blame him. I wanted to leave, but I didn't. Because leaving would have meant accepting it was all real. And I wasn't ready. Not yet. I stayed until the end because leaving early would have meant admitting it was real. There was one sentence I couldn't forget, because it wasn't said with anger. "She'll sign it. She always does." Calm, unbothered. Not a trace of cruelty, which somehow made it worse. That line wasn't said in frustration or as a joke. It was just a statement of fact, delivered like you'd mention the weather or ask someone to pass the salt. And I knew, as soon as those 5 words settled into my chest, that it wasn't the first time they'd said them. It had the weight of routine, like I'd unknowingly been cast in a role long before the curtains ever opened. Kevin didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was almost gentler than words, like he understood the sharpness of what I'd just heard and didn't want to make it worse by offering pity or comfort I wouldn't take. He stepped back slightly, giving me space. I stared at the black screen long after the video ended. They'd expected me to sign something, again. Whatever it was, they assumed I'd go along with it, because I always did. That's what he'd said, what they all believed. And maybe they were right. Maybe I had made it easy. I tried to trace it back in my head. The moments where I'd gone quiet instead of speaking up, nodded instead of asking questions. There were too many to count. Little things that seemed harmless at the time. James bringing home forms from the accountant, telling me, just a couple things to sign, standard stuff. His mother offering to help with wedding logistics, but quietly making decisions for me. His sister nudging me into certain social circles, so you'll fit in better. I hadn't seen the pattern then. Or maybe I had and I just didn't want to name it, not until now. She always does. It echoed like a bell in an empty hallway. I sat still for another moment, then slowly stood, legs stiff and cold. Kevin didn't follow as I stepped into the hallway. The light felt too bright after the dim security room. A few servers passed by, carrying trays toward the back kitchen. None of them looked at me. The world hadn't shifted for them the way it had for me. I walked slowly, not because I was unsure where to go, but because I wasn't ready to be in open space. My hands stayed at my sides. I didn't pull out my phone. I didn't check the time. Everything around me looked normal. Spotless tile floors, soft music playing in the dining area, silverware lined up neatly on white linen. But I wasn't normal anymore. The further I walked, the more distance I put between myself and that sentence, the sharper it became. It wasn't just betrayal. Betrayal would have meant they broke something. This felt worse. They hadn't broken anything. They'd simply used it. They hadn't deceived me with malice. They hadn't even hidden it that well. They just assumed I'd never look. She'll sign it. I thought about every time I'd heard James tell me, "You're easy to love." I used to think it was a compliment. I'd smiled when he said it, believed it meant I was steady, trustworthy, uncomplicated. But now I heard it differently. It meant I wouldn't question him, wouldn't press, wouldn't challenge the script they'd already written for me. I'd mistaken being agreeable for being respected. The cool air hit me when I finally stepped outside. The parking lot shimmered under the late morning sun. My car was still parked where I left it. I walked toward it slowly, not ready to go home but having nowhere else to be. Just past the edge of the building, I paused. I looked back. I thought maybe Kevin would come out, say something. But the door stayed shut. And honestly, there was nothing left to explain. His silence, like mine, carried its own message. I knew now. That was enough. I took a long breath and let it out slowly. Somewhere between the door and the curb, a shift started inside me. A boundary formed, not loud or dramatic, but steady. A small wall, invisible but real. The kind you build when you finally realize people have only seen the version of you that's easiest for them to manage. They don't know me. They never bothered to. And for the first time, I stopped needing them to. I stopped trying to untangle their motives or rewrite what they'd done into something more palatable. This wasn't about love or misunderstanding. It wasn't about miscommunication or unmet expectations. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about love or trust. It was about control. I drove home with the windows up, no music, just the hum of tires and the occasional rattle of something loose in the glove compartment. I could still hear his voice, not loud, not cruel, just certain. She'll sign it. She always does. I went home knowing one thing for certain. I couldn't unknow what I'd heard. Pulling into the driveway, everything looked the same. Lawn trimmed, porch light still broken, even though James said he'd fix it before the wedding. I sat in the car for a while, engine off, hands still on the keys. Eventually, I went inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No TV buzzing in the background, no footsteps from upstairs. I stood in the entryway for a full minute before realizing I hadn't closed the front door. I turned, pushed it shut, and locked it. Then stood there again, hand resting on the knob, like I might need to open it right back up and run. I walked into the kitchen out of habit. Everything looked untouched since morning. 2 mugs still on the counter, crumbs from toast. The same dish rag folded the way I fold it, even though I've told James a dozen times to just let it dry out instead of refolding it damp. I set my phone on the table and realized I hadn't checked it once since I left the restaurant. No missed calls, no texts. That somehow made it worse. I walked through the house like a guest, like someone afraid to touch anything. I made it to the bedroom but couldn't sit. I turned on the lamp, turned it off again. Opened the closet, stared at my clothes, then shut the door before the silence could say anything more. It wasn't until I went into the bathroom and caught my reflection in the mirror that I stopped moving. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were too tired, her mouth too still, her shoulders pulled in, like she was bracing for something. I stared at myself and whispered a question I didn't want to hear out loud. Was I really that easy to control? It wasn't even about them anymore. It was about me, my patterns, my willingness to let things slide, to not rock the boat, to keep the peace. Had I been so afraid of confrontation, so desperate to be seen as kind or agreeable, that I'd turned into someone they could predict like clockwork? She'll sign it. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, not because I was tired, but because standing up took more energy than I had. Part of me wanted to pretend I'd misunderstood, that maybe they were talking about something harmless, a business document, a joke. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it sounded. Maybe if I said nothing, this whole thing could just pass. I knew that version of myself well. The one who finds a way to smooth over the rough parts, who tells herself it's not worth the fight, who lets things go so everyone else can stay comfortable. And I hated her, but she was familiar, and she was loud in moments like this. I leaned my head back against the tile wall and closed my eyes. What if I just let it go? What if I said nothing? Would that be easier? Would it be safer? But then the answer came, quietly, from a place deeper than fear. If I said nothing now, I'd be teaching them how to treat me. Again. If I stayed quiet, I'd be proving them right. Again. And I couldn't bear the thought of that. I opened my eyes and looked at myself in the mirror again. Still tired, still pulled in. But now, something else lived behind the eyes. Not strength exactly, not yet, but something that might grow into it. A memory surfaced, unexpected and gentle. Years ago, an old friend once told me, after watching me fold in on myself during an argument, "Don't disappear just to make it easier for them to look at you." I hadn't thought of her in years, but that line came back now like a thread tossed across a deep place. I held on to it. The sun had dipped below the windowsill. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't moved much at all. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the lamp in the living room. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't rehearse what I would say. I didn't cry. I just sat. And that night, I realized staying silent would cost me more than speaking ever could. By morning, I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was looking for proof. I woke up before the alarm. The sun hadn't even touched the blinds yet, but my mind was already up and moving, sharp in a way it hadn't been in weeks. No fog, no tears, just stillness with a current of direction under it, like a tide turning quietly in the dark. I moved through the house like I'd rehearsed it. Coffee, phone, notepad. I sat at the dining table with everything laid out in front of me. And for once, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt necessary. I started with my phone. I opened our shared calendar, the one James insisted on keeping to stay organized. There were notes there I hadn't remembered agreeing to, lunches, meetings, appointments I was supposedly involved in, but had never actually attended. I checked the timestamps, repeating entries, identical phrasing, all set by him. Then I pulled up our shared email thread with the accountant. Months ago, we'd agreed to let him handle things, since it was just easier. That's what he'd said. I scrolled down through the replies, looking for anything I might have missed. And there it was, a PDF attachment, buried 3 emails deep, labeled plainly, "Consent to transfer." It had my digital signature at the bottom. I didn't remember signing it. I didn't even remember seeing it. I opened the file and read the content line by line. It was phrased in that polite legalese, so carefully bland that the real implications were hidden beneath soft wording. I was listed as having reviewed and agreed to the reallocation of assets. That one sentence rearranged my stomach. I checked the timestamp on the signature. It was 3 days after my surgery, when I'd been home, barely coherent, still on painkillers. I had no memory of signing anything that week, but the signature was mine, digitally pasted, but mine. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about one bad conversation. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't stress or poor communication. It was planned, quiet, administrative, predictable. They'd counted on me never checking, never questioning, never digging. And they were right. Until now. I sat back in the chair, not panicked, not shaking, just steady. There was something cold and clear about that moment, the kind of clarity that only comes when illusion finally dies. I looked at the screen again and whispered to myself, this wasn't a misunderstanding. The words tasted like steel in my mouth. I closed the laptop gently, like I might wake something if I slammed it. I didn't want to break the stillness. I didn't text anyone, didn't call. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, rinsed out my coffee mug, and stood for a minute watching the drip of the faucet. Then I grabbed my keys and my bag and walked out to the car. The sky was soft and gray, the kind that makes everything look a little flatter, a little quieter. I drove to the county building, not to confront, not yet, just to gather. I parked near the far end of the lot and sat for a few minutes before going inside, just watching people, noticing how normal they all looked, how calm. I wondered how many of them had sat in parked cars like this, trying to make sense of something that once felt safe. When I got back home an hour later, I carried a manila folder in my purse. It had a printed copy of the document, a timestamp log, and the request history from our joint account. I placed it on the table, right where my plate usually goes, and I sat. No shaking, no tears, just breath, slow and even. Once I saw the proof, there was no going back, only forward. That's when they realized I wasn't as quiet as they thought. It didn't take shouting. I didn't slam any doors or accuse anyone of anything. I just moved differently, slower, straighter. I wasn't scanning the room for approval or softening my tone before I spoke. I didn't explain myself. That alone shifted the entire air. We were all gathered for dinner, the kind they called just family, though it always felt more like obligation than comfort. The dining room had that too clean smell, lemon cleaner and cover-up. James was already at the table, carving meat like nothing in the world had changed. But something had. I walked in and felt it. That pause in conversation when someone enters. The kind that doesn't come from surprise, but from calculation. Eyes flicked up, then away. Everyone overcompensated with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I sat down slowly, quiet, but not passive. There's a difference. You okay? Karen asked from across the table, tilting her head with practiced concern. You look tired. I nodded once. Didn't sleep much. James chimed in before she could push further. Well, you've had a lot on your plate. You know we've all been trying to help where we can. His tone had that careful edge. He said, help. But what he meant was control. And for the first time, I didn't take the bait. I didn't thank him. I didn't nod like I was supposed to. I just looked at him, even and unblinking. He looked away first. The rest of dinner was theater. Small talk, exaggerated laughter, wine poured too quickly. But beneath the surface, everything had shifted. I wasn't performing anymore, and they noticed. About halfway through the meal, Greg leaned in, all casual and too confident. Hey, I heard you were poking around some old files. Everything good? He wasn't asking. I met his gaze, steady. Just organizing some things. He gave a tight smile. Just hope you're not stressing yourself out. You know, sometimes when we go digging, we find stuff that only complicates things. Karen added quickly. He's just saying, it's better not to overthink. Peace of mind matters. I almost laughed. Peace of mind, that's what they called my silence. I folded my napkin, slowly. Let them talk. They kept trying to steer the conversation away, but the tension wouldn't dissolve. I wasn't giving them anything to react to. No confusion, no apology, no hint that I was doubting myself. That silence, the one they used to rely on, had turned into something else entirely. Toward the end of the night, James tried again. He walked me to the kitchen under the pretense of helping clear dishes. I carried a stack of plates. He brought the wine glasses. Once the door swung behind us, he dropped the performance. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Just want to make sure you're not misinterpreting things." I placed the plates in the sink and turned slowly. "Like what?" His face twitched, just slightly. "I mean, it's easy to misunderstand stuff when emotions are high. I'd hate for this family to get caught up in something messy." There it was, a warning, wrapped in politeness. I gave him nothing, not a frown, not a question. Just stood there, letting the silence do the work. He stepped back. "Look, I'm just trying to help." I nodded. "Of course you are." He didn't know what to do with that. The rest of the night played out like a poorly written script. People pretending to enjoy dessert. Conversations looping in safe, meaningless circles. No one asked me anything real, but I noticed how often they looked over, how stiff their smiles became. When I stood to leave, no one stopped me. I gathered my things calmly, like I wasn't carrying the weight of knowing, but rather the clarity of it. They wanted me unsure. They wanted the old version of me, compliant, accommodating, always looking for harmony. But I didn't owe them that anymore. I walked to the door without looking back. No dramatic goodbye, no parting words, just silence. And it landed heavier than shouting ever could. That was the moment I knew they were afraid. They didn't know how much I already had, and how close I was to using it. That morning, I woke up with a clarity that felt almost unnatural. There was no rush of adrenaline, no spiral of questions. Just a calm that came from knowing exactly what I was walking into. The meeting had been scheduled under the pretense of clarifying next steps. Nothing unusual, just family logistics and a few updates. But I knew better. The venue was neutral, a community hall we'd used before for birthdays and graduations. Public enough to keep things civil, at least on the surface. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the sun was high and unbothered. I sat in my car for a moment, letting the stillness ground me. In the passenger seat, my folder sat closed, not stuffed, not dramatic. Just enough. Just what mattered. When I entered the room, I could feel the anticipation. Karen smiled too widely. Greg was already seated, phone in hand like he had something ready. James stood near the far wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. They'd rehearsed something, I could tell. We exchanged small greetings. The table was already set with coffee and papers. Someone had made a show of being organized. 10 minutes in, Greg leaned forward. "So," he began, "before we get into anything else, I think it's important we clear up some confusion. There's been a lot of, let's say, miscommunication lately, and it's starting to affect people's comfort levels." He paused for effect. "Frankly," he continued, "some of the things that have been suggested, implied, about family decisions and finances, they're not just untrue, they're hurtful." Karen nodded along. "We're all just trying to help each other. That's what family does. But when someone starts questioning everyone's intentions, well, it creates distrust." And then James, almost too casually, added, "We don't want to assume anything, of course, but if someone's feeling overwhelmed or unstable, we want to support that too, privately." There it was. They didn't come right out and call me unstable. They just planted the seed, carefully, intentionally, in front of witnesses, framed as concern, wrapped in civility. I didn't interrupt, I didn't flinch. I let the silence grow a little too long, just enough to stretch their nerves. Then I reached into my bag. "Thanks for the clarity," I said, my voice calm, even. "Since we're clearing things up, I'd like to share a few things too." I opened the folder. No commentary, no raised voice, just documents, time-stamped emails, meeting notes, scanned signatures, screenshots, each piece methodical, each page its own quiet blow. They flipped through them as I spoke. This one shows the date the decision was made, 2 weeks before you said I was consulted. This one is the budget line you said didn't exist. And here's the message thread where I was told not to worry about signing anything because it was just a formality. No one moved. The room, so full of posturing minutes ago, had gone still. Even the background hum of conversation from the hallway seemed to fade. Greg cleared his throat. These don't mean what you think they do. Karen shifted in her chair. Sometimes things look worse out of context. I looked directly at her. I didn't provide commentary, just documentation. James opened his mouth, then closed it again. The page in his hand trembled slightly. They hadn't expected this. They thought they'd backed me into a corner, that I'd show up emotional, reactive, easy to discredit. But I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there to show the truth. And now the truth was doing the work. I stood slowly, collecting my things. "Are we done?" I asked, not as a challenge, just a question. No one answered. I didn't need them to. They'd already said enough, and I'd said what mattered. I walked out without looking back. No dramatics, no slammed doors. I didn't stay to watch them fall, because the truth was already doing that for me. I drove home that day with the windows down. The air was cool, unusually still for late spring. There was no music, no podcast, just the sound of the road and the occasional thrum of my tires hitting a seam in the pavement. I remember thinking how strange it was, how normal everything looked, even when everything had changed. In the days that followed, I didn't hear much. No apologies, no explanations, just silence. A few messages came through, short, clipped things like, "Hope you're doing okay," or "Let's not drag this out." But none of them asked how I was really feeling. None of them admitted what they had done or what they had tried to do. It turns out, when people who manipulate you lose control of the story, they lose interest in talking altogether. I didn't respond. There's a kind of power in unanswered texts, in letting the quiet stretch long enough for someone else to sit in it. It says more than 1,000 angry words ever could. A neighbor mentioned Greg canceled a family dinner he'd been planning for weeks. Karen was seen returning something at the church she used to brag about donating. James's wife unfriended me online without a word, a digital version of slamming the door. All of it quiet, subtle. But I noticed. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't tracking the fallout with satisfaction. It just unfolded on its own, without me needing to lift a finger. And that somehow felt like justice. Not dramatic, not loud, just enough to tell me the balance had shifted. One afternoon, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, the kind of day where the sun comes through the window just right, warm but not blinding. And I realized something. I could finally breathe in my own home again. The tension that used to follow me from room to room was gone. Not because the walls changed, but because I had. I used to think family meant unconditional loyalty. That no matter what happened, you stayed, you forgave, you kept the peace. Even if that peace cost you pieces of yourself. But now, I see it differently. Family is not just shared blood or history. It's how people show up for you when no one's watching. It's how they speak about you when you're not in the room. And most importantly, it's whether they see you as a person or just a role to play in their script. I had played that role for too long. The good girl, the fixer, the one who never caused trouble, who smoothed things over, who stayed quiet for the sake of the family. That silence didn't protect me. It erased me. And so I chose distance. Not out of anger, not even resentment, just clarity. I saw the truth and I knew I couldn't unsee it. I could love people from afar. I could hope they changed. But I didn't have to keep offering myself up to be misunderstood, dismissed, or twisted into someone I wasn't. Some relationships can't be repaired, not because we're unwilling, but because the other person refuses to meet us halfway. That's not failure, that's boundary. A few days later, I found something in the back of my desk drawer. A note, years old, written in my mother's handwriting, back when she still remembered who I was every morning. It said, "Don't disappear, okay? You have more strength than you know." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Just one of those sentimental things she used to say when she worried I was going through too much alone. But now, reading it again, I felt the weight of it. She had seen it. Even back then, the way I was fading behind everyone else's needs. The way I let myself shrink to fit a space that never made room for me. And in just a few words, she reminded me to hold on to myself. That note didn't just take me back. It brought me forward. I'm not who I was when this started. I'm not waiting to be invited anymore. I'm not looking to prove I belong. I belong to myself. I wake up earlier these days, not because I have to, just because I want to. I make my own coffee, sit by the window, and let the light touch my face before the rest of the world stirs. It's not dramatic, nothing grand, but it's mine. Some mornings I think about reaching out, writing a letter, saying, "I forgive you, but I won't return." Other days, I don't think of them at all. Both are healing. I didn't lose my family that day. I finally stopped losing myself. End of chapter 9.